With cities in lockdown because of the global pandemic, working from home has become the new normal for many. So what are the benefits and challenges? And will this permanently change the way we work? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Bernard Smith. The coronavirus pandemic has fundamentally changed the way we live in just the last few months. Governments trying to halt the spread of the disease have imposed strict lockdowns. That means hundreds of millions of people are now working from home, away from the office. Video conferencing services, for example, have experienced a huge boom. But working remotely has created immense challenges for businesses and employees alike. We'll bring in our guests in a moment. First, this report from Alexia O'Brien.
It's the same message across the world.
So you must work from home if you can.
Where possible, we should continue to work from home.
In order for society to work, we ask you to work from home.
From small companies to global bodies like the United Nations, home is now the office as governments urge people to avoid commuting and going into crowded spaces. Tech companies including Zoom and Microsoft have reported a huge spike in demand for their video conferencing software. While it's convenient, remote working has its challenges.
Can I do my work? All right, we're going to do... No? Okay.
It's blurring the divide between home and office. Internet firm NordVPN found people are working up to 3 hours more a day than before. And with many schools shut as well, parents have the extra stress of looking after their children while conducting business.
So many people are in the house at the same time. And at the same time, people are preoccupied. If they're teleworking, they're focusing on that as well as childcare.
Analysts are urging companies to be more flexible.
We do anticipate during this period, as companies invest in the infrastructure, the software, the policies around work from home, that in the future there may be a larger swath of jobs that are able to work from home as employers and employees demand it.
With countries extending lockdowns to stop the spread of COVID-19, many people are unlikely to return to their traditional office anytime soon. And the pandemic may forever change the way we work and conduct business. Alexia O'Brien, Inside Story.
Let's introduce our panel. In Hong Kong, we have Mabel Cheng. She's a counsellor and research officer at the University of Hong Kong. In Rotterdam, in the Netherlands, Ali Fenwick, a professor of Organisational Behaviour at Hult International Business School. And in Woodbridge, Virginia, in the United States, Avis Jones-Deweever, a career reinvention strategist. Welcome to you all. And one question for all of you, and I'll start with you, Mabel. How have you had to adapt the way you work because of the restrictions imposed by coronavirus?
Well, actually, it's been quite hard, but we have figured out ways to cope with this situation. As a psychologist, I switched my practice to online. So my company developed an online platform for me to see my patients, but it's been difficult because lots of kids or some family, they don't know much about how to use the technology. And on the other hand, for my research job, we are able to work from home, but not as efficient as in person.
And Ali, what have you had to do to adapt to the new way of working?
I have to say that the adaptation has been fairly easy. You know, being a professor at the university, we disseminate knowledge, and normally that happens in the classroom. But now it's happening online. And I think for a lot of universities, they've had to make this switch to go from offline to online. And so far, it's been very exciting. And for me, at least, it's been it's made me see that there's I guess a bigger audience you can speak to through a webinar. So the transition has been, I would say, a very exciting one, but it has been challenging a little bit to be able to deliver the same message with the same impact in the same way. So, but overall, it's been very positive.
Positive for you, Avis, as well. What have you had to do? Have you learned anything from it?
Well, you know, I am in, relatively speaking, a fortunate position because as an entrepreneur, part of my business from the very beginning has been online. It has always been a strategy of my business to ensure that I had an online aspect. And so I am more fortunate than others who are sort of delving into this place for the first time now. However, I am in contact with clients who are having to make this transition right now, and they are experiencing problems with productivity. They're experiencing problems with focus. They are experiencing problems with, in fact, how to be able to manage people remotely. I mean, this is a very different thing than if you're just right down the hall from someone. And so for those who are just now beginning to make this transition in terms of how they do business and how they lead effective teams, this can be a rather significant transition.
So, Avis, what rules do we set for ourselves? What ground rules do we now have to set when working from home?
For me, I think it's very important. I definitely teach my clients to specifically delineate where you're going to work, and that will be your workspace. Like, for example, I'm in my office right now. And what I find is that for people who are just making this transition, they might be in front of the, TV, on the couch. They might be in their kitchen. They might be here and there. And the problem with that is that it doesn't really train your brain to focus and really engage in work in the same way than if you delineate one space for that. It also creates a space where you aren't able to really cut it off. I mean, if you are bringing your laptop into bed with you, where do you get a place of peace? And so it's really about being able to delineate a space, a physical space that you dedicate your working hours to so that you can make a better transition and delineation between your professional obligations and still your personal responsibilities and joy with your family and with yourself.
And so, Ali, yes, what boundaries would you say people should set? How do you separate work and family time, and how best do you manage all of that?
Well, I like what Avis said. Physical boundaries are absolutely important. And the reason behind this is because work and private life can easily blur when you start to work from home. And a lot of us have not learned yet or developed effective habits of how to work from home. I think I'd like to add here that not just physical boundaries, but I also think we have to have mental boundaries to help us to make this, the clear cut between work and private life in the workspace. So what do I mean with this? Physical boundaries means, psychological boundaries or mental boundaries are those that we can kind of, our routines and our daily scheduling or our approaches and habits. These are really important because we have to be mindful of the fact that not everyone has a physical space to go and work. For example, I actually dress up, as you can see right now. I do this because I want to create also mental boundaries. So when I finish my work, I finish at 6 o'clock or at 7, and I physically or kind of mentally also leave and go back into my private life. So more than what I would do when I'm working in the office, when I'm working at home, I ensure that I really live up to my schedules. I have my morning routines, my afternoon routines, and when I have a hard stop, I really stop with work and I actually get changed to put on other clothes so that I don't only move away from the physical environment, but I also move away from the mental environment. And the reason for this is that we have different identities, the dad, but also let's say the manager. And I think we also mentally have to switch identities to be able to make this transition work effectively.
Mabel, in Hong Kong, you have people living in tiny apartments, often mum and dad, grandfather and children. How do you tell people in Hong Kong to manage working from home in such very challenging environments?
Or to be honest, physical space has been a great challenge for us. I think this is one of the reasons why it's been hard for us to cope with working from home, and many people actually looking forward to going back to the office because the house is packed and people lack physical space. I know a lot of parents, they have to work in midnight because during the daytime they have to take care of their kids, and their kids don't have school right now, and they spend a lot of time homeschooling their kids. So it's been hard for us to set such boundary.
And Avis, before a lot of us were forced to work from home, people liked the idea of it, but it doesn't always work, does it? What are the limitations for productivity for companies when people are all working from home and not physically in touch with each other?
Right. I mean, ideally, it's you know, as you mentioned, for many years, people have been pushing for more flexible, not only work schedules, but being able to have that ability to work from home when necessary. And I do think that it is a good option for some people and for some companies and for some families. But in this particular scenario where everyone has had to make this abrupt shift, it has become more difficult for some managers to really be able to maintain that team environment that's easier to create when everyone is physically in front of themselves. Yes, they can have conference video meetings and all of that, but it's still not the same sort of emotional, maybe even, and professional connection that you have with human beings when you're seeing them face to face. But on the other end of the spectrum, there are some folks who are just now overwhelmed and they're just never cutting it off. They feel like they're always at the beck and call of their manager who's now, you know, texting them and emailing them and want to do a video conference at 9 p.m. instead of, you know, between the regular office hours. And so on the one end of the spectrum, there are some that are having difficulty just maintaining levels of productivity. And then there are some who I believe are taking advantage of the situation and in fact are looking to have employees that are at their beck and call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Ali, isn't most creativity and innovation done when people are together, bouncing ideas off each other? Can we compensate for that when we're all stuck at home?
Yeah, you know, there is actually, if we look back in history, we actually see that there's, when people were put into solitude, also because of viruses and other issues that were happening, that some people really rise to the challenge. And so what happens is that there's actually a lot of power in solitude. Our ability to be creative, and a lot of creative works were actually created by people when they were put into isolation or had to self-isolate because of external circumstances. So it's not unusual to see a heightened level of creativity happen when people are kind of isolated or self-isolating them from home. And the reason behind this is because in our day-to-day business, when we're in the busyness of our work, we are kind of in an automatic state of mind. Our habits drive a lot of our behaviors, more than 80%. So we don't really get to tap into that part of the mind that is the most creative part of that. And so this is the beautiful thing about now, and this is another way of looking at being self-isolated. A lot of people will be now writing, they'll be trying out new hobbies, or actually picking up old hobbies, and they'll find that they're actually pretty good at that. So I would say that there's there's other side to the spectrum of working from home, is that it does heighten the abilities, creative abilities of individuals.
Really, Ali? Because you wouldn't have had things created like the iPhone wouldn't have been done by an individual at home. It needed collaboration. It needed people to work together, didn't it? As one innovation.
It does. Look, yes. Look, I have to say there's two ends of the spectrum. Innovation never happens alone, right? So innovation does happen through collaboration. The example that I just gave here was much more of our abilities to actually heighten our own individual behaviors. But you're completely right. I mean, in terms of when it comes to like product development, new idea generation, more is better than one, especially when we can bounce off and leverage different perspectives. And again, from an individual perspective, there's opportunity to, once we are freed from the fear and uncertainty of working from home, we can absolutely start to embrace the solitude and therefore also be more creative. But at the same time, the collaborations can still work because we have technology, we have devices that help us to facilitate collaboration across the board.
Mabel, what are the biggest mental health challenges for people working from home? You've either got people lonely and isolated, or you've got people trying to cope with kids and work at the same time. How do you help people like that?
So on one hand, I see people have more time to connect to each other. I see lots of online activities going on, and some people do have more time to rest and connect to each other. But on the other hand, in Hong Kong here, as I mentioned, we have the housing problem. So I receive lots of inquiry about family dynamics. People tend to be annoyed by their family members, parents, grandparents, as we mentioned, with the limited space, they tend to feel a little distressed because students, they don't have their own room to study, and parents weren't able to work at home. So that would be the downside of working from home.
Avis, we've seen a lot of people having to turn to the gig economy for work. As more people lose their jobs and join the unemployment lines, will more people be tempted to join the gig economy? And will more people have to work from home because there's no option? And will they therefore be more vulnerable to working in the gig economy? How do you help people like that?
Exactly. At this moment, we are undergoing a shift as to where the labor demands are. And so, yes, for some people, that would mean entering the gig economy, which can take place at several levels. It doesn't just mean, for example, looking at other sort of, being someone who delivers groceries, for example, to people's homes. It could be, if you have a professional skill, you can go online to an online outlet that provides people to utilize your services, specifically, like, for example, entrepreneurs to utilize your services for, per gig or per thing that you do. It could be a great place for innovation. I mean, I also work with entrepreneurs, people who are using this moment, even people who themselves have been laid off, or someone in their family has been laid off, or they've had a side hustle that they've done for many years, and now they're looking to ramp it up. For example, one of my clients is a fashion designer. But right now, she is using very beautiful, very, very beautiful fabrics that she's turning into filtered masks. So she's had this whole new thing that she's doing to drive revenue into her business. So this is a moment of innovation. It's a moment of creativity. It's a moment of adaptation. The challenge is to figure out where your skills, your talents, your interests might intersect with where the needs are today and shift in that direction to fill those needs.
But Avis, aren't people some of the most vulnerable, and this is particularly ethnic minorities as well, who may be forced to turn to the gig economy, to working from home? They're more vulnerable, are they not, from exploitation, because there's less protection in those jobs?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's less protection in those jobs. You don't have, in the United States, for example, you don't have access to healthcare coverage. There are no guarantees there in many ways. But the bottom line is there's no guarantees in the regular employment situation either. I mean, in that situation, in the regular employment situation in America, your life really is at the whim of a balance sheet. And that's why we're having millions of people being let go in this nation week after week after week. And so there, unfortunately, is no space of 100% certainty. I believe that the idea, though, is that in this moment, there will have to be some shifts into how you are able to bring income into your family. For some people, that might mean taking, for example, there are still jobs that are still hiring, but they might be very different than what your skill set is. Or you might need to look at other ways in terms of getting into the online economy, starting or growing your business if it intersects with a need that's going on right now. The thing is, this is a moment that needs to be one that's met with creativity and an eye towards opportunity. To me, the biggest challenge that we're seeing in terms of the increased death rates in America as it relates to communities of color, it intersects with a whole lot of other disadvantages that has impacted that community, like environmental racism that has led to things like increased prevalence of asthma, for example, within the Black community. And we know that is one of those things that it increases your mortality rate. So there are so many issues that underlie this, but the bit of optimism that I like to give people is let's think about what you do have, the options you do have, the assets you do have, and let's figure out where that intersects with the needs that do still exist in the society so that we can figure out how you can fill that need and still be able to bring home some level of financial stability to your family.
Ali, we were told 25 years ago at the dawn of the internet that by now we'd all be working from home, but it took this pandemic to give that idea a boost. Why did it never really take off? And so will it endure when we can try and return back to normal whenever that time might be?
I think, first of all, the back to normal is almost, in a sense, it's like in denial of what's happening today. And we can see this already happening with the transition, with what's happening with people now working more from home, developing new habits of how to work from home more effectively, but not everyone can do it. And there will be definitely people that would, definitely go back to working from home or working from the office because they really want to, and they're not used to working by themselves. But I think to address this question is, let's be cognizant of the fact that 2/3 of jobs, right? 2/3 of jobs in the industrialized markets, such as the US and even in Europe, are, they're not able to facilitate working from home setups. This is because of the nature of their work. So this means hospitals, sorry, not hospitals, but people, basically hospitals, people who work in factories, who work in retail, who work in restaurants, they're not able to work from home. And so I think that we need to be conscious of the fact that the transition can be made to a certain extent, but not for everyone. However, building up what was said before is that now, because we're now becoming more, we're realizing the fact that, we have to be more resilient, we have to be more innovative, we have to be more adaptive. And only those companies and those organizations that are able to weather the storm, let's say, are going to be able to think about how to become more resilient. And coming back to that, it's like looking at our business models, looking at our structures, looking at our management responses. Only after COVID-19 are we going to go back and say, if we made it through, what worked and what didn't work? And on the basis of what didn't work, we might want to think of what we can do to therefore be much more resilient and responsive to the future. And that also actually means that you might see businesses that did not make that transition yet, maybe now think of other ways of doing business that will facilitate and allow them to weather through potential crisis moments in the future.
Mabel, do the people you're dealing with in Hong Kong want to get back to the office? Are they nervous about working from home, nervous about what they might be missing out on?
Yeah, I think both. Hong Kong people, known as workaholic, I guess. Our society has a very fast pace, and people do look forward to going back to work, not only because they're used to the work pattern, but also because of the space as well. And people are also worried about the unemployment issues. So we've been doing lots of things to try to keep everyone together. So as far as I know, some employers, they would choose to cut down on the salary, but allow most of their employees to keep their job. So at least they would have a certain amount of income.
And Avis, do you see any changes that have been forced on us by this pandemic enduring if they ever do, as we've already suggested, if they ever do return to some sort of normality?
Right. I do believe, I agree. I have to agree that it's going to be a new normal. I don't think we're going to go back 100% to where it used to be. I believe that some of those things that we used to do will no longer exist. Okay. Just in terms of certain, in my example, for example, movie theaters may not be there that you used to love. A certain restaurant that you used to love to go to may not be there. I think there'll be a lot of things that will be different in our lives. But in terms of how, companies do things, I do think that companies will take the time now to think about really what they learned from this experience. And I believe that will lead to more remote experiences for people. I think that they will have more online opportunities, not just for meetings, but for conferences, and really being able to figure out, do I really need to fly across the country to have this meeting, or can I just do a virtual meeting? I think that the way that business is done will change. I also think on the unfortunate side of things that, we were already moving really quickly towards an economy that was beginning to rely more and more on artificial intelligence. And I wonder what this will mean in terms of particularly those jobs that are lower paying. To what degree are we going to see even an escalation of people being replaced by technology? And I'm wondering if this particular situation will actually accelerate that at an even faster path than it was previously. So it will be a new reality. And I think that there might be some positives, but unfortunately there might be some negatives associated with that as well.
We are out of time. for the moment, but thank you to all our guests, to Mabel Cheng, to Ali Fenwick and Avis Jones-Deweever, and thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website aljazeera.com, and for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Bernard Smith, and the entire team here in Doha, bye for now.